The UFC's biggest drama isn't always on fight night. It's in the hallways, locker rooms, and press conferences where tempers explode. And stick around, because the final incident tops them all. The infamous bus attack, UFC 223. It's one of the most infamous images in MMA history, a dolly smashing through the window of a fighter bus. April 2018, Brooklyn, New York. Fighters had just wrapped up media obligations for UFC 223 when Khabib Nurmagomedov and his crew confronted Artem Lobov in the hotel hallway. Surrounded and outnumbered, Lobov was berated, slapped lightly on the head, and humiliated in front of cameras. The clip spread online within hours. For Conor McGregor, this wasn't just his teammate being disrespected. This was family. Loyalty is the backbone of Conor's Irish crew, and Khabib had crossed a line. McGregor grabbed 20 of his closest allies, chartered a private jet, and flew overnight to Brooklyn. The next day, chaos unfolded. Conor stormed the Barclays Center, sprinting through the basement tunnels in search of Khabib. The Russian champion had already boarded a bus with other fighters, including Rose Namajunas, Michael Chiesa, and Ray Borg. Conor spotted the bus and went berserk. He picked up a metal dolly and hurled it straight at the window. Glass shattered everywhere. Chiesa was cut. Borg suffered an eye injury. And Namajunas was so shaken she nearly pulled out of her fight. Dana White was furious, calling it the most disgusting thing in UFC history. McGregor was arrested, charged, and dragged through the media as a criminal. But here's the twist. That bus attack sold millions of pay-per-views. It transformed the simmering rivalry between Conor and Khabib into the most personal feud the UFC had ever seen. Without that backstage explosion, UFC 229 might never have shattered records. Masvidal vs. Edwards. 3-piece and a soda. March 2019, London. Jorge Masvidal had just delivered a stunning knockout against Darren Till, silencing a hostile UK crowd. Backstage, he was glowing. Still, in fight shorts, sweat dripping, he was mid-interview with ESPN, smiling, breaking down how he just baptized Till. But then, out of the corner of his eye, Masvidal saw Leon Edwards. Walking past with his team, Edwards shouted something reporters heard him say, "July, let's go in July." Masvidal didn't like the tone. He calmly cut off the interview. "Let me just handle this real quick." Masvidal strolled towards Edwards, hands behind his back. The room went silent. Then in a flash, Masvidal snapped forward, landing a quick 3-punch combo straight to Edwards' face. Left, right, left. Security leaped between them. Cameras caught Edwards retreating with a fresh cut under his eye, blood trickling down his cheek. When Masvidal later returned backstage for another interview, he shrugged. "I gave him a 3-piece with a soda." That one-liner exploded. Fans repeated it. Memes flooded social media, and suddenly Masvidal wasn't just a veteran journeyman. He was a superstar. That altercation built the hype that carried him into a title shot, and eventually his legendary knockout of Ben Askren. The UFC 229 brawl. Khabib jumps the cage. October 2018, T-Mobile Arena, Las Vegas. UFC 229. Khabib vs. McGregor. The most hyped fight in MMA history. The bout was tense, emotional, and ugly. For 4 rounds, Khabib mauled McGregor, shutting down his striking and smothering him on the ground. When McGregor finally tapped, Khabib had proven his dominance. But instead of celebrating, Khabib pointed outside the cage, screamed at Dylan Dennis, and leaped over the octagon fence like a missile. He landed in McGregor's corner, throwing punches and kicks. Inside the cage, McGregor was blindsided by Khabib's teammates, who scaled the cage and threw sucker punches. McGregor swung back, landing shots of his own as chaos erupted. Fans were screaming, officials scrambled, and security couldn't contain it. For nearly 10 minutes, the octagon was in complete disarray. The Nevada State Athletic Commission later suspended Khabib for 9 months and fined him $500,000. McGregor was fined $50,000. Both fighters were escorted out of the arena without belts, without fanfare. But the brawl only made the event bigger. UFC 229 sold a record-breaking 2.4 million pay-per-views. The rivalry had spilled beyond the octagon, and fans couldn't look away. If you're hooked already, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. These stories get crazier from here, and we've got all the UFC chaos explained for you. Diaz brothers versus Mayhem Miller, Strikeforce meltdown. Okay, this one technically happened outside the UFC, but it's too crazy not to include. April 2010, Strikeforce, Nashville. Jake Shields had just defeated MMA legend Dan Henderson in a dominant performance. The CBS broadcast was supposed to celebrate Shields' win, but Jason Mayhem Miller had other plans. He stormed into the cage mid-interview, grabbed the mic, and demanded, "Where's my rematch, buddy?" Shields pushed him back, but before anyone could intervene, Nick and Nate Diaz pounced, and Gilbert Melendez joined in. Suddenly, punches, kicks, and chaos exploded on live national television. Commentators screamed, officials panicked, security rushed the cage, but the brawl had already gone viral. That was a clear turning point for the Diaz brothers. Fans saw them as authentic, unfiltered, and dangerous. It was pure chaos, a full-on brawl on national television. And even though it wasn't in the UFC, Dana White ended up signing many of those fighters, knowing full well that chaos sells. The Diaz brothers' reputation as the wildest fighters in MMA was set in stone that night. Hotel confrontation, Khabib versus Lobov. Think of this as the domino that tipped everything over. During UFC 223 Fight Week, Khabib Nurmagomedov and his team spotted Artem Lobov in a New York hotel. Cameras captured Khabib confronting him, grabbing him by the back of the head and demanding, "Why are you talking bad about me in interviews?" Lobov, outnumbered and visibly nervous, tried to de-escalate, saying he'd been misunderstood. But the footage painted a clear picture, Khabib's crew intimidating Conor's guy. That video clip raced across social media. Within hours, McGregor had seen it. Within days, he was in Brooklyn, throwing dollies at buses. Without that hallway confrontation, UFC history looks very different. The hotel wasn't just a random scuffle. It was the spark that ignited McGregor's rage and set the stage for UFC's biggest fight ever. UFC 279 press conference canceled. Las Vegas, September 2022. The UFC was hyping one of its strangest fight weeks ever, Nate Diaz versus Khamzat Chimaev, with Tony Ferguson and Kevin Holland on the same card. The press conference was supposed to be the cherry on top, Diaz's legendary trash talk against the UFC's rising wolf. But backstage chaos brewed before a single microphone was switched on. First, Chimaev got into Kevin Holland's face. Words turned to shoves, security rushed in. Seconds later, Chimaev pivoted and started jawing with Diaz's crew. Nate's army of Stockton teammates weren't about to back down. Multiple mini-brawls broke out in different corners of the backstage area. Security scrambled, Dana White panicked, and the entire event ground to a halt. Dana came out on stage, visibly sweating, and told the shocked crowd, "This press conference is canceled. Too much crazy shit is going on back there." Fans booed, media groaned, and fighters smirked. The UFC had lost control, at least for one night. It was the first time in UFC history that an entire press conference was scrapped mid-show, and it showed just how combustible Fight Week energy can really be. Merab Dvalishvili versus Fan, UFC 310. Not every altercation involves two fighters. Sometimes it's the fans who stir the pot. In December 2024, Merab Dvalishvili was cornering his longtime friend and teammate, Aljamain Sterling, at UFC 310. After the fight, while walking backstage, Merab was confronted by a man shouting insults. At first, Merab brushed it off, but then the fan got closer, pointing fingers and yelling. Merab claimed afterward that the man was connected to Umar Nurmagomedov's camp, a fighter he was rumored to face next. Shoves were exchanged. Voices echoed through the narrow arena hallway. Security rushed in just as things threatened to boil over. Later, Merab told reporters, "That wasn't random, that was a setup." Whether true or not, the incident reminded everyone of a simple fact. The UFC isn't just fighters. It's entourages, fans, teammates, and the constant possibility of chaos when passions run high. Conor versus Nate, the bottle-throwing war. The McGregor-Diaz rivalry wasn't built on respect, it was built on venom. At the UFC 202 press conference in August 2016, the room was electric. Hundreds of fans were screaming, reporters were crammed shoulder to shoulder, and Conor was at peak trash talk mode. Midway through, Nate Diaz had heard enough. He stood up, flipped Conor the double bird, and stormed out with his Stockton crew. But as he reached the back, Diaz turned around and let the insults fly. Within seconds, water bottles began raining toward the stage. Conor grinned like a man possessed. He grabbed cans of Monster Energy and started launching them into the crowd with fastball heat. Fans screamed, media ducked for cover, and Dana White was shouting desperately, "Conor, stop! Someone's gonna get hurt!" The footage was chaos. Bottles flew, cans ricocheted. Security looked helpless. Reporters later said kids in the crowd were crying as their parents shielded them from flying objects. The Nevada Commission fined both fighters, but in true UFC fashion, the chaos only supercharged the hype. By the time Conor and Nate walked into the octagon, UFC 202 had become one of the most anticipated fights of all time, and it delivered, selling over 1.6 million pay-per-views. That bottle-throwing brawl wasn't just a mess, it was a marketing earthquake that turned bad behavior into big business. Kevin Lee versus Michael Chiesa, UFC OKC. Sometimes the biggest explosions come from fighters who aren't household names. In June 2017, the UFC held a press conference to promote a fight night event in Oklahoma City. Kevin Lee and Michael Chiesa were there to hype their main event. At first it was playful trash talk, but then Lee made a comment that crossed the line. He mentioned Chiesa's mom while mocking his opponent. To casual fans, that might sound silly, but in fight culture, bringing family into trash talk is sacred ground. It's off limits. And Chiesa wasn't having it. He snapped back, "Don't you ever talk about my mom." Lee smirked and calmly said, "I already did." That was it. Chiesa lunged across the stage, knocking over chairs and microphones as he tried to grab Lee. In a split second, Lee cracked him with a right hand. The press conference dissolved into chaos, with security dragging both men apart. The clip went viral on social media, sparking headlines everywhere. For Lee, it was a breakout moment. Suddenly, fans knew his name, not for his record, but for the punchline he threw on stage. For Chiesa, it became one of the defining moments of his career, showing just how personal this sport can get. For casual fans, this was a crash course on how fast a fight can become real when emotions spilled over. Jones versus Cormier, MGM Lobby Throwdown. This is definitely one of the craziest and coldest altercations in UFC history. The rivalry between Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier isn't just one of UFC's greatest, it's one of the most personal in sports history. In 2014, during a promotional event at the MGM Grand, the two men faced off for the cameras. Jones pressed his forehead against Cormier's. DC shoved him hard, and in a split second, Jones threw a punch. The entire backdrop collapsed as media members scrambled, fans screamed, and security swarmed. It was shocking, but what happened afterwards might have been even more infamous. Later that day, both fighters were being interviewed separately. The cameras cut, but the microphones kept recording. What followed was a raw, unfiltered exchange between Jones and Cormier that fans weren't supposed to hear. Cormier snarled, "I'm gonna spit in your face." Jones fired back coldly, "You know I would literally kill you if you ever did something like that, right? You realize how capable I am of doing that?" The clip leaked, spreading across the internet like wildfire. Fans suddenly saw a different Jon Jones, not the smiling, polite champion from interviews, but a menacing figure who said the quiet part out loud. For Cormier, it confirmed his worst fear, that Jones wasn't just a rival, he was dangerous. For fans, it added gasoline to the fire of one of MMA's most bitter feuds. From Conor's dolly and Masvidal's three-piece to Khabib leaping over cages and entire press conferences being scrapped, UFC history is filled with moments that prove one thing. The real drama often happens when the lights are off and the cameras aren't supposed to be rolling. And that's why fans love it. These altercations remind us that MMA isn't just a sport. It's raw emotion, loyalty, anger, and chaos spilling out wherever fighters cross paths. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because in the UFC, the fight doesn't start when the cage door closes, It starts the moment two rivals see each other backstage.